Think about photography, a technology from the 19th century. The first pictures of people, it looks a bit like the oil paintings of the century before. Very often technology starts as an imitation of what was before. Just like the first movie looked like photography, right? Think of AI in a way like that. We're still in the phase where our AI looks like the painting from the past.
You're listening to The Influencers Digital Transformation, a Hogan Lovells podcast exploring how technology is reshaping industries, regulation, and the practice of law. Each episode features conversations with leaders driving change, offering insights to help you navigate innovation with confidence. This is Season 4.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Influencers, our podcast conversation on digital transformation and law. I'm Leo von Gerlach, and with me today is Lukas Egger. Lukas is just the perfect person to talk with in these totally unstable and unpredictable times of the ongoing AI craze, with all its ramification in the economy, in business, and the society at large. Lukas is Vice President of Product Strategy and Innovation at SAP, the European headquartered software and business solution giant. He is at the forefront of cutting-edge AI initiatives, transformative solutions for all types of businesses, and certainly someone with a very, very good overview of what's going on in the economy at large, down to each individual business. With that, Lukas, it's terrific to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Lukas, I think we should, unlike in other conversations, start with a bigger picture view. And perhaps the most general, biggest picture we can take at the moment is the AI bubble that is omnipresent in all the media. So do we have a bubble at the moment? Yes, no, or is it gray?
Wow. That's a fantastic question, already a hard one, because I feel like everybody has already made up their mind in a way that it feels like we're in a bubble, this exuberance. And if you look at the numbers, right, my job often involves conceptualizing what's going on and trying to come up with ideas how I make sense of what's happening out there. So we're currently investing, if you take all the hyperscalers or the company that build out the data centers, whether it's your Amazon or your Microsoft or what have you, right? We're spending more than 400 billion, or projected to spend more than 400 billion capex this year on AI, right? And that's like more than $1 billion per day. And just to put it into perspective, the entirety of the Manhattan Project, right, which ran like 4 years-ish and gave us the first atomic bomb, I think in today's money, it was like roughly around 30 billion. So we're investing in 1 year 10 times worth the Manhattan Project. So the numbers are staggering, right? And it like feels like, oh my God, there is like so much going on. So yes, we are in a bubble, but the question is, what does that mean? And is that necessarily a bad thing? Right. So obviously what we think of in terms of bubbles is like the tulip craze, right? In the Netherlands, where like simple like tulips all of a sudden had the value of a house or something like that. And it was a kind of bubble that feels like it was destructive. Just like, let's say, the 2008 subprime crisis, where there was a certain like exuberance in the market that was over leveraged with that and led to then a really bad and painful outcome. Now, at the same time, we also know that bubbles can be like a force for willing something into existence, right? We had the dot-com bubble, who laid a lot of the infrastructure in terms of like the cables and the internet connections that then fueled essentially the SaaS and the software boom that then sustained value creation for 20, 25 years. Same is true with the railroads, right? We overinvested at that point 6% of GDP. We're roughly around 1% of GDP right now. And we crashed, but it was important to kind of like synchronize like our work and the investments to pull that into existence. Now, I don't want to diminish any pain that can be created through bubbles for people in the economy. I just want to say like it's not an easy story. And maybe as a last thing to put there is, it's not like a bubble, like if it is a bubble, or I would say it's a bubble, it's not like one we have seen before. Because in the past, most of the time, stuff was over leveraged and there was debt involved. But right now, the companies that are investing most heavily are also sitting on a volcano of cash, right? So Google, just pointing out one at random, right, made, I think, 100 billion in revenue in one quarter. Right? So it's not that they're lacking the cash flow to sustain CapEx investment. So it's a little bit more complicated picture. And to me, I think the more interesting thing is, can we coordinate the infrastructure and the orchestration of ideas? And can we use the bubble for something good that leads then to something better? Namely, maybe the next 20 years of outsized value creation. Then with AI, not just like the cloud, right?
So something big is going on, but it's much less clear whether there's over-evaluation. And we are by all means at the beginning, as you say, of a very transformative phase, and now trying to break this down on an individual company level that has its ramifications for those who lead the organization. What would you think is the necessary mindset to include AI in strategy and in your innovation programs on an organizational level?
Again, a very good question, because I feel like that's really a question of leaders out there are asking themselves. I don't want to be too prescriptive, right? In a sense, saying that, Lukas will tell the rest of the world how they should think about something. But let me put some, let's say, useful indicators or tidbits of information out there that I think will help guide how to think about it. So whenever there was a transformative technology, right? We often in our space call about S curves, right? So there is like some sort of like a new technology then makes an old technology, it fades out and essentially takes over. Whenever that happens, we see there is a bigger shift in the markets and more dynamism in terms of like new companies coming up and gaining a market share and incumbents like losing out. And we see that, right? The average like tenure of an S&P Standard & Poor's 500 company has went down from 30 years to 5 years, right? So in a way, like the turnover has only gotten faster and you feel more pressure. And now we have this technology that potentially touches every aspect of your value creation, and not taking it seriously or thinking about it, it kind of risks of missing like the next jump to the next S-curve. So the next bigger paradigm or the next bigger regime that you're working in. And from my perspective, what I would say is maybe especially interesting or people should keep in the back of their heads is that so far in the, let's say, the past 20 years, it was maybe easier because sometimes you were able to just buy yourself into the next technology, right? You had already digitalization. Then people said, well, it's more important or better to transfer your operations into the cloud, right? But we kind of knew what was going on, right? And so we just used money to solve a problem and maybe expedite a change process or go towards like the next paradigm. Now, I would say, if you believe that this kind of approach will help you this time, there could be a rude awakening. So here's why. Because AI is not just another tool that we bolt on or like add to our, like how we run our company. It's transformative because it's not just a tool. It's a tool that itself delivers work and can use tools. So the argument that I'm making is, in order to get the value creation or the upside opportunity out of AI, you need to reconceptualize, re-engineer, whatever you want to call it. We call it business transformation, right? You need to transform your business because otherwise you will just not get the value out of it, right? And what you would end up with is just like burned initiatives of like, hey, we tried innovation, but it didn't work out. But if you're willing to transform your business, we see that the ROI, that the efficiencies, that you can get a lot out of it. So money won't save you alone. You have to change your business. And historically speaking, whenever business were confronted with a big change, it behooved them well to understand the change and be part of it.
So that's interesting. I understand you really must not miss that next step. And in order to do so, I think you need to take a very just circumspect view on things and be knowledgeable about the development. But here comes the catch. If you try to do this as an individual organization, you're just bombarded with different news, pieces of advice, business consultancy with all types of strategy, all types of new technologies coming in. So how do you survive? How do you not drown in this ocean of news and just different stuff being thrown at you?
Wow. You're describing essentially my situation, right? It's like no matter how fast you go, you feel like you barely can keep up. And there's actually a term for it. It's called like Red Queen's paradox, right? Where in an environment where, like, I think it refers to this this novel, right, Alice in Wonderland, where she talks to the Red Queen and says, like, I need to run, but it feels like I'm not moving forward. And the Red Queen tells Alice, well, in my land, you just have to run as fast as you can just to stay where you are. And I feel like that's the sentiment for a lot of people out there. They're like, oh my God, there's so much, I don't even know where to begin with. And it's a pity, especially because you can get lost in the noise. Everybody tells you it's so important that you just like opt for just jumping in and not making up your mind. And so I would say what's really important is like a couple of things how I survive, right? So first of all, consumption alone is not enough. It's important that we think about what is important to us, we define it, and we then fact check. And we make sure that we don't just like listen to what's out there, but we decide what we're interested in. And so we are trying to replace FOMO and noise and all these things with a thesis about what's currently going on and try to see whether we can validate or falsify that. So there's also then an important aspect of not only to not get swept away by the anxiety and the FOMO, but I also would say it's a strength when everybody else is distracted to outsource the breadth of like all this like information and insource the parts that are really important, where you feel like this is where we are differentiated as a business, where we can do things that nobody else can do at the quality or at the speed, whatever, in what ways you want to differentiate. And so like, this is where I have my thesis, where we'll work with what I hear and I will incorporate that. So don't get anxious. Don't feel the FOMO. Try to not just consume, but to establish like ideas that you can falsify, right? And then decide for your business, which one are the parts of like this avalanche of information that you are really interested in and that are valuable or necessary to monitor and understand.
I love that reference to Alice in Wonderland and the Red Queen's race. I used to teach my incoming class of new partners always with that just emblem and that story, that combination of speed and substance. And that is by the magnitude or by the power of 2 or 4 in these crazy times right now. And maybe that's a nice inroad to combine it with something I think you coined, the peacocking phase of the AI transformation. Maybe you explain what you mean by that terms and why that is so important in that transformative process for businesses.
You certainly did your homework. Thank you for the question. I think it's, it makes a lot of sense to ask the question because it's an extension of what might happen if you get lost in the noise of the market. So what do I mean by the peacocking face? And I guess your listeners can't see me, but I'm literally now pretending like with my jazz hands, like just like a peacock is showing its feathers, right? Like, look at me, look at me. It's like this tendency of companies saying, oh, wow, everybody tells us we need to be part of AI, so let's do it. And what are they doing? They include a chat interface that looks like ChatGPT, right? Like this sequential, very linear, like I talk to an AI and gives me an answer. It's like they all want to demonstrate that I too am capable of showing my AI feathers and can implement the technology. When what is more important is to figure out how this technology can really help you, not just by providing yet another chat interface, but by using the capability overhang. So all the stuff this technology now can do in a way that's natural and right for you, which is different than just copying what is out there. Because if you just copy what's out there, per definition, you're not differentiated. And as the market gets rougher and the speed increases, that's what you want to be. You want to be differentiated. The last place you want to be in is to commoditize yourself because you're doing what everybody else is doing.
And just a follow-up question on that, is that the reason why so many companies fail with their implementation efforts? What we are now reading, that it's very hard to find the sweet spot for your use cases, for that way of individualization, customization, tailor making of given AI solution for your individual business. What's the story behind these high figures of failed implementation processes?
Wow. How many hours do you have, Leo? That is a question which every year in our industry, everybody asks themselves, and everybody comes to the same conclusion, saying like, it shouldn't be that high, right? Like if you really want to be good at something and you still don't hit the level that you want, like it becomes like some sort of riddle, a puzzle, like something that to figure out. Now, I can break it down to you what I think are a couple of reasons why innovation is often not as successful as it should be. So for instance, let's start with, we see a lot of companies adopting what is maybe already expected, or let's say like some chat interface. And I think that when they start companies something new, and I don't blame them, right? Or any leader for that matter, that it's a natural tendency to first say, okay, let's protect our downside. But with innovation and really big potential like upsides, you should be maybe more focused on upside enablement and not downside protection. So in a way, often like innovation starts either too timid, or it starts already with like the wrong set of, this is what we want to achieve. So very often I hear like, hey, we want to do innovation, but the most important thing is that we hit our ROI targets. And that's fair. You can say, I want to hit my ROI targets, because ultimately any innovation can never be a means to an end by itself, right? It needs to serve the business. But at the beginning, when you just start with something, de-risking, learning velocity, enablement, there's a lot of things that might be more valuable when you first start with something, just than protecting the bottom line or creating upside for ROI opportunities. So there is multiple like ways in which innovation tends or can go wrong. I would say the best way, and you didn't ask that, but I think the best way of avoiding it is to be honest with yourself as a company, as leadership, right? And say, what are the failure modes that will be the most likely ones that we will see? And then build your work around it, right? So, for instance, in my organization, when we tackle a new project, one of the failure modes that we used to encounter were this kind of what I would call step aside and let the cool kids do their job, right? With innovation. Oh, we have some super smart innovation guys. Like, now let's give them some space and let's do that. I felt like that creates some sort of barrier between the people who work with customers, the people who care for innovation. And that's not the answer. What we need to do is innovation needs to be a service, and we need to empower the organization so they can thrive because they know their customer problems. It's not like the researchers in their little room that know exactly where they can create outsized opportunities. It's the people who understand the pains and the wishes of the customer. So we made a conscious effort of saying, like, it might go wrong for other reasons, but it won't go wrong because we are isolating and not like integrating the parts that need to work with each other. So when you're a big organization, you're asking yourself, hey, AI, it's scary and it might fail. What should I do? I think the most honest answer is not to take any framework and say like, oh, I get a consultant or this framework, but to say what could go wrong and then go through the steps of desirability, feasibility, viability, agreeability, right? So like the mechanisms in which ways it can go wrong, right? And it's like, what are the things that typically don't work for us or that hurt us? And let's make sure that we anticipate them. And then you have also already started something which is maybe more important than innovation. It's establishing feedback loops for organizational learning, understanding your company better, and getting into the habit of what do I want to achieve? Like, how do I learn from this? And then evaluate again, like, what was the outcome, right? To create this loop. And by the way, that's the superpower of successful companies, whether they are applied to innovation or their core processes, how they run their company. They say, like, we understand, we measure, we improve.
So, and I understand in order to scale up that feedback loop, you need to really drive the AI solutions down to each individual of the business. So to make everybody participating so that feedback can come just from any angle of the organization. And then you may have, I think, a platform of a successful integration process. But then you also said, of course, companies think about ROI and just show me where the money is and how does this translate into any sellable business proposition. That's, I would assume, then another problem on top of that. And that's probably not the same, but yet again, an additional challenge, right?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things to unpack here. And I love how you're tackling the hardest questions first. So in a way, it's both. In terms of how to run innovation, it's a bottom-up and top-down affair. Why? Because you need to enable and empower your teams and the people to work with this technology and own like end-to-end the solutions, right? So a team needs to be empowered to work with the customers and the pain points and learn and iterate fast and all of that, obviously, right? There's also like, it doesn't like abdicate like the top leadership to say like, okay, you guys, the visionary part has been done. We use AI, now you do stuff, right? That cannot be the answer as well either, right? What needs to happen there is you need to, and that's maybe the most important thing, you have to change the incentive structures and do at least two things. First, you have to systematically lower the cost of failure. If you want to try out new stuff, you need to systematically lower the cost of failure. And the other thing is every company has a currency, right? What is valued? And if leadership does not drink its own champagne, as the quip might go, right? Or show that this is part of what they want to see, they just want to shove it to the side, then it won't work either. Because in the end, any successful innovation will change things. If it doesn't change the company in some way, whether it's through processes or people or something, wasn't like an innovation, it was not a business transformation. The goal of a business transformation is to create a company that otherwise would not have existed. All right. So if the leadership is not receptive to that and willing to adapt the incentive structures and create the space where this then can play out, it won't work either. So it's both top down and bottom up. That's the one thing. And then you ask like, there's always then, but this juxtaposition or like the tension with return on investment. Are we making money? And I think that's also like a perfectly important question, because you cannot just innovate for the sake of innovation or do stuff and be happy about it. In the end, you need to make money, because that's like essential to the company, right? I like Peter Drucker, by the way. He said like making money is like breathing. If you stop breathing, you're dead. But then again, only breathing is not enough to have a happy, fulfilled life either. So, there's like a little bit of that. Now, I'm not sure if you specifically asked me, but how could you make sure that you are tackling the right ROI? I would say start small, but measure hard. So get the instrumentation right. Don't worry too much in the beginning about the outcome. Make sure that you can enable your organization to get there. And then once you feel confident, you have like shown that you can end to end go through the process of bringing a new technology at the core of your business operations. If you're capable of that and you have the telemetry, the instrumentation of defining what is it that we want to achieve, at that point, then you can go and like, all right, let's map out our processes. Let's understand like the value creation end to end for our business. And let's make sure that we can drill down and understand the PPIs, as we call them, process performance indicators, like KPIs, but for how your business runs, right? And then based on that, say like, where is the biggest opportunity? In the beginning, by the way, it's fine to start with a project, and it does not need to be the most ROI positive one, right? Because you want to show that you can do it. You want to get the foundations right. And then once you have the proof point, it needs to be mapped out and just a strategic or portfolio exercise where you go like, I understand the value flow. I understand how we make money. And now I evaluate for each one of those points, the intersections, like what can be done with AI. And by the way, that's not a one-time exercise. That's an exercise that you will have to constantly iterate on, simply because the market is moving so fast.
And in that exercise, and coming back to what you said at the beginning, one point is to drive the cost of failure down. And I kind of understand this in a way because you need room to experiment, to come up with different solutions, test them out, and let it play out. Which one may flourish, which one may be the one that runs fastest, which ones that you might not anticipate in the beginning, but then proves to be the winning bet. So in a way, it somehow needs a variety of option that you just let compete out against one another. Is that a fair understanding of that process?
The way how I explain it to people in my organization, sometimes I try to work with intuition pumps. So ideas that push your intuition in a certain direction. The thing that I'm saying is whenever we have a new technology, like the most interesting and powerful stuff is not the things that you immediately think of. So let me give you a concrete example, even if we don't show pictures right now, right? If you think about photography, a technology from the 19th century, right? The first pictures of people, they often look like they're sitting super still, and it looks a bit like the oil paintings of the century before. There is some reasons because of the technology and how long it took to take a picture and stuff like that. Fair enough. But very often technology starts as an imitation of what was before. Just like the first movie looked like photography, right? But then if you now talk about modern photography, you have time-lapse, tilt shift, like abstract photography, computer like guided or aided like photography. And it's like, if you think about the photo art, it's so wildly different from like those stiff portraits from the 19th century. And so I'm telling them, think of AI in a way like that. We're still in the phase. And by the way, I think in the arts, they call it remediation. So we're still in the phase where our AI looks like the painting from the past. Like if you zoom out from ChatGPT, it looks like a little bit of as if you zoomed out from Google, right? It's like, But the most interesting stuff will be unique in its own thing. And the only way to get there is you need to open up the space for this creation to unfold. And if you then constrain it, and it's very costly to fail and experiment, you will see less of it, because people in the end understand incentive structures very well and they will act upon it. And that's why I said before, it cannot be just empowerment of, let's say, the bottom up and the individual contributors and the teams. It also, there is a really important job for the leadership to understand that this is, if you want to be successful, you have to work on the incentive structures and guiding the opportunity towards the outcome that is most beneficial to your company. Sorry, I'm quite passionate about it because I feel like there is a lot that people often overlook. And so your questions just hit at the very core of what I often encounter and what I do.
It's just perfect, Lukas, because I just love listening, and I'm sure all the listeners will just love that too. So it's just perfect the way you continue. And but going back to the substance of what you said, it's a two-way street. I think you need to empower the people on the grassroots level, but you need to have, I think, a clear tone from the top, and that communicates with one another, and that is in a way that feedback loop you referred to earlier. But of course, there is also that less happy side of the equation, let's call it. We see an incredible phenomenon at these days. So GDP is going up, employment figures are not going up, they may go down, and that's a totally new development in world economy, that there is a disassociation with employment and GDP. And a good reason for that may be the early signatures of AI impact. How do you see this evolving, the employment market, the effect on jobs, and the participation of just every individual in that big game?
Again, that's, I think, a question that a lot of people worry about, or that tackles some sort of real fear. And I understand it. I would say I do have a different, or maybe not iconoclastic, but maybe a counterintuitive opinion on that. And I don't want to start with a narrative or an analogy. I will just go with historical facts, right? So 200 years, 150 years ago, 80% of the workforce were engaged in the agricultural sector, right? So, and now for US and Central Europe, the number is round about 3%-ish, 2 to 3%, right? So from 80% to 3%, yet nobody is unhappy about that, right? So the question is not how big is the change, but how fast is it, right? If you to put it really crassly, falling down is not what hurts you. It's the change in velocity or momentum that really is painful, the quick change. So the question is, will we have a hard and fast takeoff, as they say in the AI space, or will it slowly change the world, and then societies will adapt? Now, the next thing I want to bring up, because I think it's overlooked, is Geoffrey Hinton, maybe the most well-known name in all of AI. He got a Nobel Prize for physics, because there is none for computer science, obviously, but really important figure in the space. Said 2015-ish, 2016, well, we should stop training radiologists. And everybody thought this was a deep insight. Why? Because at that point, for the first time, we had AI models, not language models, but AI nevertheless, that was at the quality of a trained radiologist. And back at the time, I think it's fair to assume that a radiologist would spend at least 30% of their time analyzing, I'm not exactly sure whether they were X-rays or MRIs or whatever, right? But they were analyzing that stuff that AI was doing at the level of a trained and board certified radiologist. Now, today, radiologist is, as I understand it, either the highest or second highest type of physician in terms of vacancy, right? So we need more radiologists than ever, and they're really well paid. I think the average like income is $500,000 in the US or something. It's pretty staggering. So what happened there? What happened is what we call Jevons paradox. Sometimes when things get easier and cheaper, demand will vastly outpace supply. And now, we don't know for sure how it will play out with intelligence, but just because stuff can take over parts of what we're doing doesn't mean that there will be less work. Normally, people gravitate or then transition to the next bottleneck, and most of the time, it's a good deal. So radiologists earn more today than they did before. And we can go even back, right? Take the Luddites from the Industrial Revolution, just because so people are not saying, hey, Lukas is telling this one story that fits his idea. The Luddites are now seen as the people who tried to tear down the steam looms, the power looms, right? But what people often don't hear is they themselves were the beneficiaries of the last revolution, namely spinning the yarn through steam power. And they were really well trained, very well compensated people. So they were not fighting the machines. They were fighting for the status that they gained because of a technological revolution. So long story short, I don't have a magic ball, right? I don't know the future. I think there's a lot of FUD, like fear, uncertainty, and so forth. I think the Jevons paradox and generally the elasticity of demand in terms of intelligence does not yet take it to a foregone conclusion that everybody will lose their job. What I do think is very important is you might have some place in the company, but what's sure is it will not be the same job. You might have a position within the company, but the role might be very different because we all need to re-engineer our roles.
I hear you, but like to challenge you one more time
please.
On this. I mean, I understand that this is true for a highly educated job where you can then drill down deeper and just make a quality step upwards. But our economy, our employment market is also composed of a lot of leverage where people just are, let's put it that way, just stuff for scale. Yeah. They multiply existing tasks like a incoming investment banker doing equity analysis and the like. And that the same goes for maybe accountants, historians, lawyers, you name them. Might there be a difference there in terms of how quick that goes? And same goes for these communicative tasks that are a little bit more standardized, like kind of customer service and the like.
It takes deep insights to ask good questions. So you are asking harder questions because you already see a lot of the controversial and hard topics. So I really appreciate that. I would say, well, yes and no. I try to use examples to build up intuition. Now, in a sense, the argument is if the high value, white collar jobs are falling away, will that not kind of contradict what you talked about in terms of Jevons paradox and so forth? Now, let's take competitive chess for a second. It's 20 years or 30 years actually, right? That Kasparov lost to Big Blue. And ever since that time, there was no human that was capable of beating a computer. So you could argue at that point, what's the point of playing chess if there is never a chance of a human doing it better than what the machine could do? Now, chess is now more popular than ever before because it turns out that humans care about what humans do. And even if the computer is now better at playing chess, people don't watch live streams of computers playing chess. Some might do, right? But in general, they care about the humans and the drama. Now, obviously, you could say that's entertainment. That's not the rote repetitive task of the office. And I would say, well, great. Nobody likes rote repetitive tasks. That's why we call them boring tasks. Now, the question is, there's always scarcity in some way. And we shifted like what is prestigious based on scarcity. And I can give you examples, right? For instance, like in Central Europe and Germany for a while, iron was more valuable than gold because there was an induced scarcity. But we can have multiple places of that. Now, the question is, will there be maybe a scarcity if it's very easy to get all material things? We might see a shift of value creation scarcity towards the emotional space, because I might get like all the answers from a computer, but I don't want my advisory to be through the computer. Maybe I want like somebody, a human, to interpret, to help me, or just to be an emotional like help there. Now that quickly becomes weird or strange, right? But what I want to advocate for is that we shouldn't just like run with the assumption that just because the job goes away, everything else will as well. I think most of the time stuff just shifts, and there will be more demand if stuff gets cheaper, Jevons paradox, but also there will be, I think, scarcity will lean over to the things that computer won't be good at. And I think the emotionality and like the personal connection, especially the trust, is a domain that for a little while will be impervious to attacks from AI.
Let me just put a marker down, because that's such an important point you just touched on, that we have this paradigm shift in terms of, if AI becomes so good at these standardized tasks of dealing with content, it may be the specific individual human touch that differentiates yourself from what the system already provides. And that may be then a very good distinctive feature for anybody trying to make progress in their professional career, right? In terms of being particularly trustworthy or particularly individualistic, insightful, creative in their viewpoints that they provide. Just bringing that individual note to something may be just more important than it was. That's the way I understand you.
Absolutely. I think you could even go so far, and it's a very sharp observation of yours. You could go so far and say, we're turning towards an allocation economy where it's easier to allocate, let's say, AI to tasks and they do it for you. But what is valuable in terms of doing is, to a certain extent, taste. And taste, you have to build up taste, because you have to ultimately make the decision on the allocation and you have to create the trust. And I think these like aspects will be even more important. Having good tastes, and taste not just in terms of like food or like in what is it like, how do we want to allocate resources to solve the problem, and what is a graceful way of dealing with this, with our customers, with this technology and using it.
We need to take that opportunity to touch on agents, because that would not be a proper comprehensive talk if we hadn't spoken about AI agents at that point. So where do you think are we on that journey of being autonomously supported in any business task, and just how rapid do you see any development?
I want to tie it back to something I said before, and that might now make sense when before it was mostly me rambling, right? When you asked about so much information, like an avalanche hitting us, like how can we stay sane and work with it? Like one of the benchmarks or charts that I'm actually interested in, not so much like the benchmarks of like humanities last exam and how good they are in like mathematics or whatnot. What I find quite high in entropy, meaning like it provides me a lot of like interesting information, is to what extent can AI take over tasks successfully in terms of like how long the task would take me, right? So if I think about like, hey, please rewrite this email. I've written it in English, but you know, I need to send it in Spanish or German or French or whatever. Essentially, that would take me, let's say I'm bilingual, like it would take me maybe a minute or two. Now, we can already see on like a logarithmic graph, right? So it's an exponential situation, that we get technology in regular intervals that doubles that time. So today, if you were in an environment that is already tackled a little bit faster and harder by AI, namely development, that you can give a task to an AI and say like, hey, make sense of all the code for our online service and explain it to me and help me understand the code base. That typically takes hours or days, depending on the size of the code base, or even longer, right? For people to figure out. And now we compressed essentially time into what an agent can do successful in like seconds or minutes, what would take us for a long time. So for me, like this kind of thought, like to what extent can we compress time? That to me is an interesting indicator of like how like valuable is this whole agentic stuff. So do I believe in agents, or do I believe they're wildly overhyped and maybe detrimental to companies? Yes. Both things are true. It depends like the timing and how you zoom out. So I would say right now there is this exuberance, like from the first question you asked, like the bubble, right? There's an exuberance because we see like, hey, if we can conjure and put that lightning into a bottle and make that work, oh my God, that would be so valuable. And, it so much money and GDP growth and whatever you want, right? So there is outsized expectations. And whenever that happens, there's ultimately a downfall, right? And it crashes. And the story that I tell people when I talk about strategy to get an intuition, what I'm trying to explain here is the following. Not a Nobel laureate, Paul Krugman, not that I care especially about Nobel laureates. It's just that it feels like they are a little bit impervious to criticism at some point. Anyway, he said like, the internet is probably just as important as the fax machine to the economy. I think he said it like in 2000 or what, I don't know. Like it was a long time ago. And I understand why he said it. Now, if you invested in everything but like cloud companies in 2000, you would be orders of magnitude poorer than if you invested into the cloud. So over time, what might crashed and burned and looked like a bad idea made all the difference. And right now, pretty much the entire market rides on AI and agentic expectations. So do I think it will come down? Yes. But then will we walk up the plateau of efficiency and make it into something that really creates value? I also think yes. It's just a different time horizon that we need to look at, because ultimately this agency and tools that itself can use a tool is just too powerful of technology that we don't want to incorporate it. And so it's complicated, the answer. I'm sorry that I'm always like giving complicated answers.
No, I think it's complicated, but it's very clear. Despite the overhype, I understand from what you're saying, there is an element of time and speed that agents will bring into work, and it will just turbocharge, if applied effectively, the work of individuals and make work faster. And just bringing that back to the beginning of our conversation, when you spoke about the Red Queen's race and the speed that is needed to keep up with the development, I think there is a kind of certain exponential power now on the element of time we are seeing. And that brings me perhaps to the close of that conversation for what leaderships, what the C-suite should be doing in the next couple of months to deal with this, if there's a kind of priority A list of those things that matter most, aside from the time aspect, and really drill down additional best recommendations from you, Lukas?
Hard question, but good question. Would I advocate for in terms of like for leadership to change? Like, first of all, the best change is yesterday's change. And if you can't change it, then today is the best day after yesterday. I would say, again, and I will stay true to the course of what I said before, systematically lowering the cost of failure. If you can do that, if nothing else, that already will help a lot. The next thing, mandate AI literacy for leadership as well, by the way, right? You cannot just like throw that like into the organization and be done with it. Making AI a currency so everybody understands that depending on where this technology goes, it will also, like the incentive structure and how the company looks like or what it looks like will also change. And then there's a couple of maybe more tactical things, namely, for now, like everything like changes, right? So I'm probably contradicting myself in 3 years from now. But anyway, right now it's very commoditized. The best technology is the same that everybody else gets. So you cannot meaningfully differentiate your business just through using AI, right? Because everybody's using the same. So the way how you can differentiate is, there's a couple of ways, but I would say the first and most obvious is to get your ducks in a row, as they say, and understand what kind of unfair advantage do I have through valuable, non-public data, right? The context that makes it clear for an AI how, essentially the taste that we talked about, right? You want to codify the taste that the implicit knowledge about your processes and how you do things, that this can be used in conjunction with AI. So that is obvious, like a first step. Now, there is a couple of steps that I'm like especially interested in because of my work that are very unglamorous, but often the biggest success is unglamorous. As they say, like real success is what? 5% inspiration, 95% transpiration, like sweating, like showing up is 90% of your success. So I would say the biggest factor that is very unsexy is understanding your business and be able to have process observability, to understand, like, if we're now changing things in the setup, like how will it affect my income, like my revenues, my profits, like all of the steps. How fast am I with my base business processes, and how efficient, how effective, like all these things, like just to understand yourself better, right? Get your secret weapon, namely the context and data, right? And then lower the cost of failure, make it a currency, and set the entire organization step for step on a journey of making good on it. So that's, I would say, the first things. And then you can even now break it down a little bit more technically, because there is then a lot of things you should do individually, whether it's the empowerment of the 5% of your organization that are just waiting for an opportunity to try out new stuff. It could be to finally bridge the silos between IT and business and make people talk to each other. It could be talking about the boundaries of your company, saying, wow, if we now can do things that were cost prohibitive or that we think would really make a difference that were outside of our business, well, it's a new game. So let's look at the entirety of what we want to do and let's pretend that the rules are being rewritten. It could be that. It could also be like starting with roles in your organization and making sure, hey, we want to communicate to everyone, because that was, I think, a really important point from you. Like, hey, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and so forth. Let's make sure that we need you. We don't see AI as a means of letting go of people. What we see is your roles evolving, because you are, per definition, the best people to create outsized opportunities, because you have all the tacit implicit knowledge that can differentiate us. Then make it clear. Now, this is part of your job now. So it could be at every end of the company where you want to start, and it depends on the company. But coming down to, let's say, my work, all of it will only work if you can establish those feedback loops. And we try to make a very strong case that this can only work if you have the ability to quantify the change in your company and you get good at it, right? If you train for the Champions League, like the highest like European soccer league, you cannot just chance it and go like, yeah, I might train like this way or other. You have to know exactly what you want to achieve and be able to put it into numbers to create the feedback loops. Otherwise, you're playing with your potential future advantage.
That's a totally strong plea for what I would call a 360 imperative. So you need to have full transparency of the insight and the value creation processes just to make the most of it, to understand what is proprietary, to utilize that in competition, to lower the cost of failure, to let them different models play out all internally, and at the same time absorb everything that comes from the outside in order to stay on top of things. So it's a hot seat to be in management in these days of transformation. Lukas, I think that was totally insightful. Thank you so much. I think that was wonderful. I think we benefited so incredibly from your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I hope you join us soon again for the next edition of The Influencers that will be coming up soon. Until then, take care. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to The Influencers Digital Transformation from Hogan Lovells. To explore more insights and resources on emerging technologies, visit digital-transformation-academy.com. Follow the podcast on your preferred platform to hear future episodes as soon as they're released.